I've had several different people write into me within the last few weeks demanding to know whether or not they have talent. In one or two cases, it was instead phrased in terms of, what do I have to do to prove to you that I have talent, that I have the talent it takes to do this? These people writing into me lately, they're not seeking encouragement in general. They're not just asking me whether or not they should pursue a particular career. They're really asking me to get involved in and lend my name to their project. This video, if you haven't seen the description, it's going to talk about video games as an example, rather than just drawing examples from the arts, book publishing, painting, illustration. But even music provides us with examples of the same kind of puzzle of what it is to have talent, and the strange sense in which having talent and even having ability is not enough. Now, talk about talent, we talk about ability, and then we can talk about proof of accomplishments. You've already done the thing it is. You've already succeeded in doing the thing that is that you're claiming to be talented in, that you claim to have ability in. What's the gap between talent and ability? What's the gap between ability and accomplishment? And then even when you're talking to someone who already has real world accomplishments, the sense in which even that may not be enough. I was talking to an artist recently, and it's a very interesting contrast to the conversations I had with artists more than 5 years ago now, when I was actively trying to get someone to illustrate this series of children's storybooks I'd written. I was talking to an artist recently, and she sent me some pictures of cartooning she'd done. So this is the style of drawing that we call funny animal drawing in English. If you don't know why we use the term funny animal, there was actually one particular comic book titled Funny Animals. But anyway, funny animal, it means a certain style of cartooning where you draw a cartoon of an animal with some human features. They may have hands and feet like a person, this sort of thing. Anyway, so she sent me some samples of herself, of her drawing. And again, she wasn't just asking in general, like, do you think I'm talented? She wasn't just fishing for compliments. She was really trying to pitch. She was really trying to convince me that she could be the person to illustrate a series of children's storybooks I've written. Okay, so talent is one thing. Actual ability, what you're capable of doing here and now, is another. And then there are accomplishments where you already succeeded. You've already made a successful storybook cartoon, what have you. I told her, without being offensive, as honestly as I could, I think the gap in your case between talent and ability is like 5 years of really hard work. So I forget now, I think she sent me images of a cartoon panda, but if it wasn't a panda, it was some kind of teddy bear like cartoon. I didn't say this to her then, but I'm saying it to you now. Okay, you can draw this cartoon panda and it looks okay from a certain angle. Can you draw this panda walking up a staircase? Can you draw it walking down a staircase? Can you draw it falling down a staircase in a way that looks funny? Can you draw me a story where the panda is frozen in ice and goes to the future and meets the other characters, but because many decades have gone by, now they all have lines in their face. They look like elderly versions of the other cartoon panda characters. Can you draw this character looking young, where he has a flashback, he has a memory of his youth, and now it's a teenage panda, and there's something different about the cartoon? Flash forward to the future, or as they say, time travel, or the character's locked in ice or something. Draw the character looking elderly. If you guys don't have experience with illustration, this stuff is hard. And how long is it going to take you to do that? A real cartoonist, someone who's mastered this stuff. And if you're in the room with somebody like this, minutes, they take the page and fill it up. And it's not just that, can you draw this panda with different kinds of lighting, different kinds of shadow? What does this panda look like standing in front of a fireplace? What does this panda look like in a pitch dark room? In real life, you can't see anything in darkness, but when you're drawing a cartoon, there's a certain style of drawing where you get across to the reader that this is happening in darkness. Can you draw this panda desperately thirsty walking through the middle of the desert? Like most people think about talent in this very simple way, like, oh, wow, great, you can draw a cartoon panda. And you're not thinking about how many hundreds of hours or thousands of hours separate that kind of talent from that kind of ability, right? Now, next step. Okay, once you've built up this ability, let's say you invest 5 years in which you wake up every morning at 6 a.m. and you draw, like you really practice cartooning for 1 hour solid between 6 a.m. and 7 a.m. before you go out and do all the other things you need to do in your day. And guys, I've heard interviews with career cartoonists. I've never read a book like an autobiography of a career cartoonist. Not all of them are honest about how much hard work goes into this. But I remember one guy really describing, his commitment when he decided to become a professional illustrator. And there was desperation and poverty involved. And he felt that he had the talent, but he knew he needed hundreds and hundreds of hours of practice to build up his ability, his speed, his accuracy, there are all these different elements to it. And again, come back to that example of a cartoon panda falling down a staircase. Okay, can you draw that where the reader can understand the action? You're not looking at it wondering, what's going on here? Where you're communicating, this is a panda falling down a staircase. Okay, that's one thing. Now can you draw it in a way that looks funny? Now can you draw it in a way that looks sad, that looks tragic, that looks serious? Like those subtleties. And can you do it fast, and can you do it reliably? And can you do it in a way that's beautiful, that makes people say, wow? Makes people say, wow, you're a really great cartoonist. I remember this particular interview I'm thinking of. He got himself a job illustrating like cans of soup and packaged products that were on sale at a store. It was a certain chain of grocery stores. And when they had a sale, they wanted an artist to draw these items, really boring items, like a box of crackers, a can of soup, a box of crackers and a can of soup together. But that was the style for this particular corporation. They didn't want to have a photograph. They wanted to have a nice black and white, professionally drawn image of these really boring objects. And he got himself that job. And I forget, he said how much he was paid per illustration. He was paid $300 per illustration or something. And he drew and drew and drew these really boring images again and again and again as part of building up his skill. Today, I remember that style of advertising. It's a long time ago. Today, it's all digital photography. I don't think you see that kind of illustration really ever from a grocery store, department store, or anything else. My point being, artists may want to cultivate the illusion that what they do is effortless or that their talent is innate, and it's not. All right. Now, here's the thing. Middle-aged people can be tremendously cruel. And I identify as a middle-aged person. I've identified as a middle-aged person for more than 10 years already. I'm going to deal with some of my own experiences this way. But let's just mention, when we're talking about drawing a picture, there's only one person involved. It's just you. It's you and a pen and a pad of paper. So it's fairly easy to judge. If you're talking about music, we're talking about 6 musicians working together. Think about how much more difficult the calculations are when just 6 people are involved. You're talking about creating a video game. How many people are involved in creating this video game? Okay, minimum 6, right? An indie game. Maybe there are 6 people involved. Maybe it's 60, maybe it's 600, right? Depending on the scale and budget of the video. But whether it's 6 people or 20 or 30 people, talking about small independent video games, all right? So there were a lot of different people we're talking about judging, relying on, to really have what it takes to have the raw ability, to have the talent, right, to see this thing through to actually being a successful project, successful accomplishment, that third stage. And guys, I mean, if you read any newspaper, the newspapers are full of examples of people who had accomplishments, who didn't just have talent and ability, people who actually already had at least one successful film, and then Hollywood investment gave them millions of dollars, and it produced a flop, or produced a flop and a flop and a flop. They had a whole series of failures, right? Their competence was misjudged, not just on the basis of talent or ability, but on the basis of real world accomplishments you could see. I think now this is about 10 years ago. Do you guys remember the last remake of the Fantastic Four movie? People joked and called it Fantastic Four Stick. Unbelievably terrible film. Everyone ridiculed how awful it was. Well, do you know the stature of that film director before he was given that project? He was regarded as a great genius in Hollywood. He was regarded as tremendously accomplished because of the project he had before, or one or two projects he had before. And then he was given a big budget, mainstream Hollywood movie to make out of a comic book, Fantastic Four. And it was in every sense a disaster, including, I think he would get stoned and drunk. I think marijuana and alcohol were his problem. And he would misbehave on set. And there was at least one case where he was misbehaving on Twitter and Reddit while drunk and high and so on, and like talking about what was wrong with the film publicly. A whole lot went wrong. And he hasn't quite been blacklisted in Hollywood since then. Trask was his name. Trask. I remember that. It was an interesting example. So this is someone who wasn't just perceived as having talent and ability, but who already had accomplishments, that he'd already proven he could succeed, right? And this led to failure after failure after failure. It was a misplaced judgment. So that's not the topic of this video so much. We're mostly looking at those first two stages, the gap between them. And the difference between having a kind of teenaged attitude towards these things and having a middle-aged attitude towards these things, neither one of which do I recommend. Hopefully by the end of this video, you'll get a sense of what the philosophical approach is to talent that I'm recommending you adopt here. But by the way, people only grow up. They only mature when they want to. You can have a teenage attitude in your 40s, 50s, and 60s. So when I'm saying a teenage attitude, I don't just mean that teenagers alone have it. Now, look, so musicians tend to be more honest about the gap between talent and ability, right? Some artists will be, some won't, but most artists will not sit you down and talk you through how many thousands of hours they spent drawing a little cartoon bear again and again and again, and what the process was to really build up their acumen so that now they can do it and it looks effortless, right? It looks effortless now because the effort was already invested. That way of thinking about the arts, that way of thinking about talent, it is more common with music. It's not common with writing, right? People don't talk about writing a novel that way. Like, okay, well, there were a lot of hours put into, building up your ability to write, and now it looks effortless. There were maybe a lot of failures leading up to that success. The creator of Conan the Barbarian, he died very young, and because his writing was so successful, his failed stories, his rejected stories, have now been published. But when he's around 22 years old, you can see, because all this stuff has been published, you can see these failed ideas for stories that were rejected and didn't get published while he was alive. You could see he's 22 years old and he's struggling. He's basically trying to write the same story again and again. No offense, but he does, okay, there's this barbarian from ancient Atlantis, and he's thinking through the same simple ideas. He's developing his ability as a writer again and again and again. And then finally, he has a hit with Conan the Barbarian. I think most serious literary critics would say there were maybe only 2 or 3 Conan stories that were well written, but nevertheless, those 2 or 3 were so well written that it's immortalized the name of the author and of Conan himself. Okay, but music seems to be the area where we're the most honest about this. With writing, people want to think, oh, the writer was tremendously talented. Conan the Barbarian, which is not the most successful, not the most sophisticated example of literature we could use here. It's a good example for that reason. Okay, Conan the Barbarian is a big hit. Well, did you know he had like 10 or 12 failed attempts leading up to that successful attempt writing Conan? Again, they're all published now. You can read the sort of drafts, the incomplete sketches that led up to that big hit. And Again, the quality of writing there was not so good. He was a struggling writer in his 20s. Okay. Well, with music, unlike writing, we don't have this obsession with presuming that people are just born, not just talented, but they're born with ability. And that kind of the final draft is the first draft. It's very much what people want to believe about philosophy, fiction, and nonfiction writing. This stuff just pours out of the artist's mind in an imperfectible form. And I've worked as a professional editor, and you have to deal with that. The French were the worst that way. The French really believed that. The French really believed, no, all writing should just be like writing a diary. Like the book, like the first draft should be the final draft, should capture the spirit and feeling of the moment and can't be perfected. And of course, they were wrong. Okay. One of my many half-brothers, his first name is Chris. And if you've been following my videos, you will have heard me mention lately. Let me say, I had to listen to his music growing up, partly because my father was literally paying for his recording sessions. So, in those days, you'd pay to go into a studio. The studio would press a CD on plastic. Then I think you'd pay a separate shop to make 500 or 5,000 of the CDs, and your hopes of getting ahead as a struggling musician, a struggling artist. Well, okay, for many, many years, and this is not when my older brother Chris is a teenager, it's when he's a middle-aged man already, right? My father is paying for my half-brother to have time in the studio, for him to record these albums, and to some extent for him to distribute these albums. It's like self-publishing. And at that time, it was the CD that was king, the compact disc. That was the format for music, right? So it was a cheap medium, but it wasn't that cheap. You still had to pay for the studio time and what have you. So I would be subjected to, hearing his music at different times. I did see him perform live several times. And guys, I'm going to go on a limb here, and I'm going to tell you, he devoted himself to this art form. He did the hard work for many years, for many decades. Yeah, starting as a teenager for decades and decades, here's the thing. He had the talent. He had the ability. I don't think he ever recorded a single song worth hearing. Not one. Not one song, not one album. Now, be clear. I'm not saying he never recorded a single song that was a hit. I'm saying he never recorded a single song that is worth listening to. Because, there can be all kinds of songs that are really worth listening to. They're meaningful, they're beautiful, there's something about them, but they didn't become commercially successful. That's a different question we're dealing with, right? And the other day, when I've now recorded 3 songs on YouTube. I have zero education in music, which is another interesting story to get into why it was I had zero education in music. I've recorded 3 songs out of total ignorance. And I know those 3 songs really found an audience that appreciated them. Let's say 1,000 people really appreciated those songs. And yeah, they're satirical. They're joking around, but they're not just joking around. There's satire, but there's also a serious element or edge to those songs. And you guys, a lot of people wrote into me saying, "Oh, that song you upload, oh, I really get it." Okay. I am claiming that my brother never accomplished this once. Now, very briefly, I was once at a wedding, and my brother whipped out the guitar. I don't know if this was actually arranged. I suppose it must have been. And he played classical guitar. He played Spanish guitar. He played several different styles of guitar, just solo, unaccompanied. It was the first time in my life I could sit there and go, wow, this guy is really talented. This guy really has ability, right? So he had the talent. He practiced for thousands of hours. How many hours did this guy spend playing the guitar in his life? Okay. But guess what? That's not enough. You can have the talent and the ability, and you can produce garbage, right? You can produce music nobody wants to hear. You can produce songs that aren't meaningful to anyone. Same thing with painting. You can have the talent, you can put in the time and develop the ability. You produce paintings nobody wants to look at. They're not beautiful. They're not meaningful, right? And guys, what percentage of musicians are we describing here? What percentage of, painters? I mean, a huge percentage don't even get to this point. They don't have the talent and they don't develop the ability. They don't put in the hard work. But of the people who really put in the hard work, who develop in this way, what percentage never produce something worth seeing, worth hearing, worth listening to? And now, at this moment, we are talking about art, drawing, illustration, cartooning, and music, where relatively few people are involved. What happens when we talk about video games? We talk about software development. What happens when we talk about movies? At least 20 people are involved. Probably 40, 50 people are involved. Making a video game, making a movie. Okay, got a comment from the audience. Quote, I don't necessarily think that immediate audience reception is the best way to judge artistic production. You're wrong. Okay, what's the difference between a diary and a published book? When you write your diary, you're writing for yourself, motherfucker. When you publish a book, you're writing for other people. You are writing for an audience, period. Okay? Hey, why is Shakespeare full of sex jokes? He had to appeal to an audience immediately. Now, there is some philosophy in the writing of Shakespeare. There's some commentary on politics. There's some commentary on religion. Line by line, what did Shakespeare write more of? Like sexual innuendo, sexual humor, or political commentary, philosophical statements? It's the sex jokes, okay? Shakespeare also has a lot of violence, a lot of sword fights. They're normally left up to your imagination in the script when there's a sword fight, okay? Why? Because Shakespeare was writing for an audience. He wasn't writing for himself. Okay, so Selin, start your own YouTube channel. Sorry, Selin's the name of the guy commenting in the audience. Maybe you should start your own YouTube channel. Oh, where you push this bullshit theory. This is my YouTube channel. And I'm not telling you you're half wrong. I'm telling you you are 100% wrong. All right? Now, okay, we can think about it from the perspective of the artist. We think about it from the perspective of the audience, the relationship between the artist and the audience. But guess who stands in the middle, right? It's a publishing company. Whether you're talking about publishing books, publishing music, investors behind making a film, a studio, producer. There are these kinds of people. You have to convince. You don't just have to convince them you have a great idea. You don't have to convince them of your talent and your ability. You have to convince them there is an audience for this. There's an audience who wants to see this, who wants to hear this. Okay? Guys, art is not publishing your diary. Now, there are some historical figures who are so important, like political leaders and so on, that we may publish their diary as evidence, of what happened and so on and so forth. There may be some people who, while they're alive or after they're dead, where we publish their diary and people buy and read their diary. Okay? When you write a diary, you are writing for yourself. Okay? And Selin, I guarantee you've never been on stage saying this bullshit. This attitude you have, how do you think you do on a stand-up comedy open mic night? How do you think you do? And guys, I write for an audience. I've only published 2 books. I've written innumerable essays. I'm not talking to hear the sound of my own voice. I'm not writing these books for my own satisfaction. I am writing for an audience. And although that audience is small, I mean, you guys already know this, both of my books, I've had quite a number of people write to me and say that this is the most profoundly meaningful thing they've read in their lives, or the most profoundly meaningful thing they've read in 5 years or 10 years. There are people for whom those books had a really big impact. Something similar can be said about these YouTube videos. Okay. Coming back to the issue of the cruelty the callousness, the ruthlessness of middle age. Um, I remember I had one school teacher in high school, and she knew my family. So the situation was something like my older sister was friends with this teacher's daughter. They're all about 3 years older than me, those girls. And so this teacher, I'm not saying that she knew my family really closely, but she knew my sister. She'd met my parents, and I think she actually had my sister in one of her classes too, at something like that. So she knew my sister, she knew my parents, she knew my family. And I remember I took this class with her in high school. At that time, the high school system in Toronto, and I was in the special gifted program for the special program for extra intelligent students. um, Program that I consider utterly despicable. In case you haven't picked up on the nuance there, picked up on my sarcastic undertones. Anyway, I was in the special program, and we were allowed to choose our courses in mimicry of university level education. So this is my first year of high school, and I chose a very advanced science course that you're supposed to take in your final year. And it was with this teacher who knew my family. Now, it was incredibly stupid of her, but from the first day of class, she judged me to be a moron, and she assumed this was my final semester of high school, that I was about to start university just a few months later. And, you're a kid. So this is grade 9. I was a kid. I was really young. Whatever I was. I don't know, it was like 14, something like that at the time. And I looked like a kid too. I didn't look old for my age at that stage. And, in many ways you're dumb, but you can pick up on these things. You can pick up on the teacher being snide towards you. You pick up on the fact that the teacher thinks you're an idiot. And, this is how she looks at this student, talks to this student, and this is how she talks to me. And so at that time, high school was 5 years long, right? I'm 4 years younger than everyone else in the class. But, I was just aware of this. It didn't really bother me. But I was like, she really thinks I'm stupider than everyone else in the class. And again, most of the students, at least 3 years older than me, 4 years older than me, this kind of thing, right? Because it's a 5-year program. It's the difference between first year and the final year. And I remember, whatever. She had this contemptuous attitude towards me the whole class. And then on the very last day of the class, I get bad grades in the class, but I don't care in the least. And, at the very last day of class, she has a brief chat with me. And again, she knows my older sister. It's just incredibly stupid of her. She must, unless you think my sister and I are twins, you know what I mean? Unless we were born simultaneously, you must realize I'm several years younger than her. She comes over and she's so condescending. She's like, "So, you didn't do so well in the class. Are you going on to university now that you're done with high school?" She says some shit like this to me. And I said to her, "No, this was my first semester of my first year." Again, I guess she must have assumed I had failed a year. I was doing an extra semester after finishing with. I don't know what the fuck she was thinking, how she got into her head that I was at the very end of high school. And her reaction, it's not even what she said. You could I'm sorry, we all speak the same first language here. You could see she realized, oh, I was wrong about you. She realized that she should have been kind and encouraging and supportive towards me, because this was my first week on the high school campus. I was actually a young kid who had ambitiously taken a final year course, taken an advanced level course that actually she had been judging me as being, I don't know, a bad writer, or however she judged me, or being poorly spoken or inarticulate or something, that actually I was several years younger than all the people she had presumed were more intelligent and more able than me. You could see it written all over her face. I forget exactly what she said to me. She didn't say the words, "Oh, I was wrong about you," but she said in this kind of astonished way, "Oh, I didn't realize you were so young." And she said some words to the effect of, I judged you wrong. She didn't apologize or anything like that. But I was aware. I didn't care, but throughout the whole class, I was aware of that, this dynamic where she was judging me as if I was the stupidest kid in the classroom. My point is this: middle-aged people who are primarily accustomed to dealing with other middle-aged people, they're not interested in judging talent. And most of the time, they're not even interested in judging ability. They're only interested in judging you on your proven accomplishments, what you can do and what you already have done here and now. So, some of you guys have been following the channel for such a long time, you already know this. There was an artist I employed, I wrote a contract for. I was going to pay hard money. I had the money at that time. There was an artist I paid to illustrate my children's storybook more than 5 years ago. So some of you will remember way back when this was discussed. So this was someone who had already graduated from arts college, had a degree in art and illustration, and had seen the samples of her work. I said, okay, good, let's go. Right from the beginning, there were warning signs that this person was going to fink out, that they weren't going to complete the project, that they weren't even going to attempt the project. They kept asking me for hand-holding and stuff. And I was like, no, look, I'm not going to tell you page by page how to do this. You are the artist. We've signed a contract. It's your creative vision from here. Like, we see how you interpret the story and illustrate it, and I'll give you feedback, but no, I'm not going to hold your hand and tell you to do this. She ended up completely finking out, admitting she was not capable of doing this at all. And are we talking about a lack of talent or a lack of ability somewhere at that? Okay, well, here's the thing. Imagine if I had said to her what I said to that artist just a few days ago, the artist who drew the picture of a panda. What if I had said, look, you can't do this today. How about we change the date on this contract? How about we post-date this contract for 5 years from now? How about you wake up every morning at 6 a.m. and you work really hard on this kind of illustration, and 5 years from now, I get back to you. So I've just told you, this happened 5 years ago. We could Google her today and see how good or how bad her art is, right? Nobody does that. Once you exit the world of teenage people and teenage attitudes, right? Teenage people and teenage attitudes. Oh, I'm going to start a rock band. Nobody asks, are you any good at it? Oh, I'm going to be an artist. Nobody asks, are you any good at it? As a teenager, people say, oh, I'm going to be a therapist. Oh, are you actually good at helping people? Are you actually good at providing psychotherapy? Does your therapy get results? Nobody's going to say that to a teenager. You go through this teenage phase of your life where everyone's encouraging you. Oh, good for you, with really no standards and no judgment of outcomes at all. And then you switch into the cavalier, cruel, catty, judgmental world of middle-aged people, where the question is, oh yeah, what have you got? Where's the proof? Can you do this? Can you do this now? Yeah. I don't care about your fucking talent. I don't care about your innate, undeveloped potential talent. What can you do today? I want to talk about ability. I want to talk about your ability to do this. I want to talk about your ability to deliver this product on this deadline now. That's all I fucking care about. Oh, and you know how I'm going to make judgments about your current ability? By looking at your past accomplishments. Oh, okay, so have you already illustrated children's storybooks? Show me what you published. Okay, give me your list of publications. Right? This is the middle-aged attitude. Now, the high school teacher I just mentioned, right? Even though it's very subtle, she was teaching a science class in high school, an advanced level science class. Still, in her shock and regret, when she figured out how young I was, that I was younger than all the other students in the classroom, which was true. There wasn't a single other student in the class my age, just remembering now. Even though it doesn't really matter, it's a class in high school. It's not the same as someone deciding whether or not they're going to publish your book, whether or not they're going to employ you as an artist, whether or not they're going to work with you as a musician, as a computer programmer, making video games, whatever the question may be, right? In this subtle way, the teacher in that class had the wrong attitude. She was judging me in terms of my accomplishments, in terms of my ability now, when I was precisely at that, nascent stage of development, when instead she needed to be judging me in terms of my talent, in terms of my potential. And she needed to be encouraging and positive towards me in nurturing, fostering, encouraging that development, and not judging me as an idiot because I was 4 years younger than the other kids in the class. And I don't know, I couldn't write essays at the same level they could in my first year of high school. So, my point is, there's a context in which the there's a context in which the teenage attitudes are appropriate, and there's a context in which the middle-aged attitudes are appropriate, but it's not linked to age in any kind of simple way. Now, look, I said the word Chinese because I'm thinking about Chinese as a language as my next example. You know, the particular artist I tried to work with 5 years ago, I'm certain she hasn't made progress. I'm certain she isn't a better artist today because I know the attitudes she had 5 years ago, right? She was already committed to an excuse-making mentality, right? I heard her excuses. I saw her attitude. And I know this is not someone who's going to wake up at 6 a.m. every day and do the work and develop as an artist. So I have no reason to Google. I have no reason to look her up now. And I had no reason back then to open the door to her long term and say, hey, look, you can't illustrate this book today, but how about you and I have more of a long-term relationship where why don't I get back to you 5 years from now? You put in the work and then we could, and that would be now, right? I'm certain she hasn't developed her ability as an artist and illustrator. And obviously the fact that she had a contract with me, that was a perfect opportunity for her to buckle down and do the work. She could have recognized she doesn't have this level of ability yet, but this is an opportunity for her to build up that ability. And it's a better opportunity than doing the illustrations for a catalog. You know, oh, do you want to draw cans of soup? You know, do you want to draw cans of soup and boxes of crackers like that other cartoonist I mentioned? Is that the kind of work you'd like to do while building up? You know, she could have said to me that she's super committed to getting this done, but she now realizes how much practice and development she needs. She could have said, look, give me a full year, give me 12 months. I'm going to hit the books. I'm going to do these drills. I'm going to really figure out how to do this. I'm going to practice and build up my ability. And 1 year from now, I'm going to give you the sketches, the rough drafts that show I'm able to perform at this level. Of course, I would have been positive if that wasn't her attitude. She was committed to an excuse-making mentality. There was a very good-looking Italian woman who wanted to sleep with me when I was in China. Topic for another video. What forms of temptation am I susceptible to? But this woman, she was really good looking and she was age appropriate for me. Like she wasn't too young and she wasn't too old. 30 something, 32. Like, I don't know. I never asked, but something like that, like 32 years old. So my point, you're in that situation. Okay. Before I said these questions of having a teenage attitude versus a middle-aged attitude, right? They apply at any point. Okay, so this is a good-looking woman who wants to have sex with me. I'm living in China, a place where I have very few options. And this woman and I, one thing we have in common is that we're both studying Chinese. We're studying Chinese at the same language institute, right? So there are a lot of reasons for us to try to make this relationship work. I spoke to her in Chinese twice. She had a bad attitude. I'm not judging her on her current level of ability. I'm not judging her on her accomplishments in Chinese. I'm judging at that more teenage level. She's not a teenager. She's 32, whatever she is. Oh, this is your attitude. This is how, really? Okay, I want nothing to do with you. Like I talked to her in Chinese twice. It was like, this is not even someone I want to sit at the same table with during the lunch break. This is not even someone I can't even be encouraging towards her. She has a bad attitude. Obviously, I've never Googled her. I've never found out what happened to that woman today. I never looked into her again. But I feel completely confident by the same token, whatever talent she had, that she has not developed it into higher levels of ability in Chinese, right? And obviously, you could meet people, again, any age. They could be 30, they could be 40. They're studying Chinese, but they have the right attitude. Okay. Now, studying a language in some ways very different from learning to play the guitar, in some ways very different from making a video game, making a painting, writing a novel, doing comedy, in some ways. But you know what they have in common? Waking up at 6 o'clock in the fucking morning and practicing for an hour before you take on your other duties. Like, some of that sheer commitment just of hundreds of hours of time. There are some things, in some ways, learning Chinese is quite artistic. Writing out the characters again and again, being engaged with it in this way over weeks and months and years in some ways. And look, as soon as we move beyond the isolated work of one artist, whether we move into music, filmmaking, video games, right? Then we get into questions about judging other people's talent, judging other people's ability, judging what is and isn't a good idea, judging what is and isn't in good taste. Okay. So the first artist I tried to work with more than 5 years ago to illustrate my children's storybook, you know what she did right? She recognized that my story is fucking brilliant. Like, wow, this is a great story. This is going to make a great storybook. So she said, yes, I want to do this project. I want to publish this. I want to have my name on it. Okay. Now, she could have been so stupid, so lacking in talent, so lacking ability that she reads the story and says, oh, I don't get it. I don't know. You know what? This story, I don't think. No, I'm gonna go illustrate that other story instead. There's already a judgment involved in her choosing to work with me. If you are performing music, rock and roll, there is a question of whose songs you're going to perform. Now, yeah, okay, in some cases, you're talking about an isolated singer-songwriter, they just perform the songs they've written themselves. The vast majority of musicians, the vast majority of the time, they're making choices about who they're going to work with. They're making choices about, this is a song I want to perform, and they're making choices about, this is a song I want to perform for this audience. Oh, we're playing in this town for this audience. We're going to do this song in this way, right? There are choices, whether you look at that as a choice being directed towards a piece of paper, like a script I've written, a script for a movie, a script for a storybook, a script in the sense of the written lyrics for a song. In that sense, as a judgment about a static entity. And there's also judgments about people. We're like, okay, well, I play the guitar, but this guy can sing, and this guy can write lyrics or can come up with ideas for songs that are really interesting. This guy can come. Okay, so now we're getting into a really dynamic judgments. And again, the only author I know who really talked about this is Machiavelli. Shout out to Machiavelli. Machiavelli talks about 3 levels of wisdom, 3 levels of intelligence. There are the people who are smart enough to come up with their own ideas and act on them, to innovate, come up with their own ideas out of nothing, ex nihilo, and then act on them. There are people who are not smart enough to innovate themselves. They aren't smart enough to come up with the ideas, but they are smart enough to sit at a round table with other more intelligent people and to discern which ideas are good and which ideas are bad. And there's a 3rd level. They're the people who can't even judge, the people who can't recognize a good idea when it's presented to them at that meeting, right? That's the fucking world we still live in, the world Machiavelli died in. He's left this. There's a lot of truth to that, right? Whether it's filmmaking, whether it's music, and even with this children's storybook, there are these kinds of choices. And those choices, they're partly political, philosophical. They're partly aesthetic. They're partly about knowing and understanding your audience, not just knowing and understanding the art form. Those choices matter. The reason why I'm raising my older brother, the guitarist here, it's not just to piss all over him, because I think every single fucking song he ever recorded was worthless. Every song my father paid for. It's fucking ridiculous. Gee, why do you think nobody else was paying you to record albums, Chris? It was all garbage. It was all for nobody. And you can see those songs on YouTube today. They have fewer views than the least popular videos on my YouTube channel. Nobody remembers them. Nobody is searching for them. Nobody gives a fuck. Nobody but your own friends and family fucking remembers that you put decades and decades into this doomed career, right? Okay, but he was talented at playing the guitar. He did have the talent, and he put in the hundreds of hours to develop that talent into the ability, right? But he made the wrong choices. He didn't have good taste. And look, all of these forms of the arts can also be described as storytelling. So storytelling, either you have to have an interesting story to tell, you have an important story to tell, you have a meaningful story to tell, or you have the intelligence to choose someone else's story, right? Like, you didn't write the song, but you chose the song somebody else had written, right? You have that kind of good taste, that kind of discernment, okay? Part of songwriting, part of music is storytelling. So are you telling a story that's meaningful and important to other people? Yes, no, maybe. All right. But like even video games, we just jump ahead here, deal with the video game side of it. Are you creating a video game that's important and meaningful to other people? Are you illustrating a storybook or making a painting, whatever that artistic form is? So this is something separable from, discrete from mere talent and ability. My brother could have been the greatest guitarist in the world in terms of talent and ability. I have no reason to think that, but let's just say hypothetically. He could be very talented and very proficient, very able, very capable, right? But there's still something crucial missing. What percentage of painters does this apply to? What percentage of illustrators? What percentage of musicians? What percentage of filmmakers? And guys, the vast majority of successful films are garbage. The vast majority of successful stand-up comedians have nothing to say. It's not funny. It's not interesting. The vast majority of comedy that has a budget of more than $10,000 behind it. You know what I mean? Like not just comedy that's put on YouTube by the creator with no budget behind it. But like whether you think of this as stand-up comedy or filmmaking or even comedic novels, comedic books being published, like it's the stuff that can be called successful. Still, like 90% of it is a creative failure. 95, 100%, you know? I just take a moment to pay attention to the audience here. Okay, Sam comes in. Yeah, Cloud says that he knew a great musician who woke up at 6 a.m. in practice hours. Right. Okay, Sam says people see talent as something you have or don't have, like an extra sense. So, Sam, that is the American spirit. I don't think the Japanese see it that way, just to use a contrasting culture, right? I think you could choose any truly foreign culture. People who are traditional Hindus in India, I don't think they see it that way. You can get into what those perceptions are. But that absolutely is the American attitude. It's like everyone else is colorblind, but I can see colors because I was born this way. I have this talent and you don't. And I mean, it's not a coincidence. That's the way talent and genius are depicted in American movies. Now, I mean, hilariously, Sam, Americans even talk that way about like basketball, about tennis, about golf, about sports, where it's so obvious that no, I mean, you know, it's not like being born with an extra sense at all. So that is the American attitude. I think, you know, you could even get into questioning to what extent are the French different, to what extent are the British different, you know, but that is the definitive, like it's a definitive aspect of American culture. That's the American attitude in a nutshell. And I think part of that is precisely you know, contempt for hard work and practice. The same way Americans have contempt for memorization. That memorizing something is of no significance, you know. That's the whole American attitude towards education. Yeah, Generation X Gamer says that he hopes my brother is not listening. I hope he is. And, you know, I hope he is. So Sam asks, haven't you said before in so many words that you're performing for an audience that doesn't exist? Well, Sam, I make more than one kind of video. So no, that criticism that I'm performing for an audience that doesn't exist, that is precisely why I am not right now doing in-depth discussions of philosophy of Aristotle or any of the sources from ancient Greece and ancient Rome that interest me. Now, there's a sense in which I'm answering your very next question. I could prepare and present a video about I'd prefer to use something more obscure than Aristotle. Let's say Isocrates. So Socrates is one person, Isocrates is another. I could make a video about Isocrates. I could make a video about Lysias. I could make a video about some ancient Greek sources, or let's say some ancient Roman sources like Appian. And there's a sense in which I could be completely confident that these videos are excellent, that they're excellent artistically, they're excellent intellectually, they're excellent politically, they're excellent philosophically. But that would be performing for an audience that doesn't exist. That kind of video. Now, the satirical song I made a couple of weeks ago, I made a satirical song about FTX, Sam Bankman-Fried, and so on. No, that is performing for an audience that does exist. Like there is an audience. It's what is it, 5,000, 6,000 views now? That is, I mean, that's comedy. It's satire, and it's satire about something people are interested in right now. There is an audience for that. There are people who see that. I mean, some people get that song more deeply. There are some kind of slightly profound aspects of that song, but there are people who just say, "Oh, wow, this is great," and they copy and paste the link and send it to their brother or their friend, probably their brother who lost a lot of money on FTX. That's something where there is an audience. So anyway, I'm not, you can tell, I'm not offended by your question. But when you say, quote, haven't you said before in so many words that you're performing for an audience that doesn't exist? All right. That comment, it's true about a certain genre of videos on my channel. And for me, the tragedy is that genre may be the genre I feel is the most important. Even Machiavelli here. You want me to do more videos talking about politics of Machiavelli? It's fascinating. I know one ODS Oliver would like me to do more videos. Machiavelli and the way in which medieval Italy prefigured the development of modern parliamentary democracy. I can do that. The videos I made on ancient China, that's a great example. The video I did, the videos plural, but there weren't that many. This video I did talking about Confucius and other political thinkers of ancient China. Remember the one that has kind of certain kinds of graphics on screen? There is no audience for that. None. Now, again, you can go watch the video now. My videos about philosophy, political philosophy in classical, pre-modern ancient China. There's no audience for that. Now, look, obviously, someone could make the argument that I should devote myself to making exactly that kind of video, the kind of video that there's no audience for. But that's not what I'm doing now, and that's not in general what I've done with the YouTube channel. So no, so I just say that comment, that's true of some of my YouTube content and not others. And look, and you can tell me, Sam, again, you could go watch those particular videos. It could be that for you personally, those videos I've just described are the most, the most meaningful, the most rewarding. It could be. But it could also be, that in reflecting on my YouTube channel, you think, you know what? Actually, what really mattered to you were the videos that were, shall we say, more populist, that were really reaching out to an audience, a larger audience. And, in some ways that might be kind of hard to be honest with yourself about. But for sure, there are people who have to admit to themselves that the videos on my channel that mattered to them the most were the discussions of the sex life of an Essien or critique of other YouTubers, me insulting Jacqueline Glenn, the lowest low. So different people, Okay. Anyway, yeah, James, I'm sure you've already seen those videos. Okay, so a member of the audience wrote to me specifically proposing that he is going to program a video game or series of video games, and that these video games are going to have a certain philosophical substance to them. So he tells me his whole concept for what he wants to do with these video games. All right. Not everyone can be Sega, not everyone can be Nintendo, not everyone can be Activision, not everyone can be Electronic Arts, not everyone can be Sony or Microsoft. Okay. We're talking about obviously an independent, small budget video game or a zero budget video game. And he mentioned that he has some people who are going to collaborate with him in making this video game. Okay. Do you think this video game, he's saying he wants me to be somehow involved in, he wants me to put my name on, wants me to, come on. Do you think it's going to be as successful as Rogue Legacy? I'm going to give you the name of that just typed out. Spelled exactly the way it's out. The original Rogue Legacy, I'm guessing that's from about 9 years ago now. I'm reminded of its existence because relatively recently they've had a hit sequel. They came out with Rogue Legacy 2. I mean, you tell me it's like eight years between the two games. I would not describe Rogue Legacy as a good game. I would not describe Rogue Legacy as a great game. I wouldn't. But it was a successful game. It had a couple of unique ideas. I haven't played the sequel. I haven't played Rogue Legacy 2. I did play Rogue Legacy 1 9 years ago or something like that. I didn't play it a lot, but I became familiar with the game. I got deep enough into the game that I understood how it worked. All right. So this is an example of the sort of 1 in a million success rate for small, independently developed games. Now, I'm just going to digress, talk about the artistic side of it. Artistically, is that game good? No. I mean, if you guys Google it right now, Rogue Legacy 1 graphics, it's not well drawn. I mean, I'm sorry. It's not beautiful. It's not nice to look at. In terms of gameplay, is it good? Is it like competent and solid? No. A lot of games now that are developed in Unity, that are developed in these kind of higher level programming languages where they're not developing down in, assembly language, they have this floaty feeling where you feel like you're looking at two-dimensional graphics sliding around. It doesn't have the same kind of moment-to-moment physics as games that were made in assembly language in the 16-bit era or the 32-bit era or what have you. In terms of gameplay, it's not tight. It's not reactive. Nobody would, you press the button and the character swings his sword, I guess. But like in terms of in-game physics, the jumping and so on, doesn't communicate anything great to you. So this is going to seem like a really strange comparison, but I lived through the early 32-bit era. I'm not getting into my own history with video games too much. I remember the single biggest difference between a good game and a bad game in the early 3D polygon era was exactly the sense of physics. Can you feel the character's feet drag along the ground when the character jumps? The sense of physics is what really mattered. There's a game that nobody remembers today called Last Bronx. Hilarious name for a game. Last Bronx. And it's set in Tokyo. It's not set in the Bronx. And that was the first game I'd ever seen where the programmers took the time to not just make characters block with a single animation, but there were unique animations for blocking. The way when one character swung a sword, the other character would lift their own sword to block, and it really clicked. It really gave you this sense of, gravity. You know what I mean? Now, maybe today that's laughable compared to current gen games. I remember the first time I saw that in an arcade, and just the brutality of that too, of seeing in that game when someone got hit over the head, you said, "Whoa!" It really, the brutality of that, of watching someone get hit over the head with a wooden plank in that game, and you really react to it as if someone just got hurt in front of you. Woo! And of course, most of the other early 32-bit games, they had this very dreamlike sense of unreality to them. Okay. From a teenage perspective, in terms of the teenage mentality, if someone tells you they want to be an artist, someone tells you they want to create a video game, all this shit, right? Are you expecting, so this person who wrote to me, expecting this kind of encouragement, are you expecting to say, "Oh, good for you. I bet this video game will be really great. I bet it'll be really successful." Like, think about the leaps of inference here. I'm assuming that you're talented. I don't know that. I have no reason to think you're talented. I'm assuming you've put in the hundreds and hundreds of hours of hard work to develop that talent into ability, right? And now we're assuming you're actually going to be successful when you never have been successful, right? And the first two, I don't know. Maybe this guy has put in the hundreds of hours. Maybe he really does have the ability to do this. But like, you're telling me just on the basis of your good intentions, like, you want this game to be a success. You want this video game to, kind of give a voice to my philosophy. And I think it's not his only philosophical interest, but some of the philosophical ideas that are in my book, presumably this guy probably has his own philosophical interest also. He wants to make video games that are kind of philosophically meaningful to the player, maybe video games that are going to change the attitudes of small children. You want to do this. Now, again, we happen to be talking about video games. We could be talking about music. We could be talking about art and storybooks. We could be talking about all kinds of things. Okay. Think about what you're asking me. Like, in a sense, is more honest and more direct when people write to me saying that they want me to tell them that they're talented. And as you've already gotten the sense in this video, I don't just refuse. I normally tell them the opposite. I tell them, look, I'm looking at your work. I think you've got 5 years of waking up at 6 o'clock in the morning every day before you can be considered talented, before you're at a level of ability where people look at what you're able to do and they make the inference that you always were talented all along. That's what we're talking about. It's like a reverse inference about who you innately and secretly were before because you developed this level of ability. These are the kinds of, is this encouraging or discouraging? I don't give a fuck. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not going to lie to myself. I'm not going to lie to others. I'm keeping it real with you. You show me your drawings. I say, this looks like your 5 years of hard work away from being able to do this. What is you're trying to do? You could take that as encouraging. You could say, yeah, 5 years from now, I'm going to be hitting it out of the park. Now, sorry, I could mention a number of different artists under this head. I can mention a number of different filmmakers I've talked to also. A lot of these people are incredibly discouraged. So switching to a totally different artist, I'm not going to say this is, but there's another artist. And I was saying to her, I was going through on a technical level, everything that's wrong with her drawing and everything that's wrong with her painting. And nobody's ever said this to her before. She's been to art school. She's worked with professors and tutors and teachers and this stuff. And I'm sorry, the things I was pointing out that are wrong with her drawing, like once you see them, they can't be unseen. And I know this had a really big emotional impact on her. But at one point I said to her, just look at the texture of the cloth in your drawings. Look at the way you've drawn a shirt and buttons and a collar. And I made a comparison. She was really upset by this. I got a courtroom drawing off the internet. I Googled around. So these are drawings done by a professional artist very quickly in a courtroom, drawing a defendant sitting next to the judge. So look at this courtroom drawing. Look at how well this guy, and he has only a few minutes. Look at how well he drew a shirt and buttons and cloth, and you have the folds of the cloth and the texture, and you can't do that. Like, you're still drawing this like an 8-year-old kid. You're just fucking taking your marker and feel, this doesn't look like cloth. It's like you have no concept of how to do clothing. I mean, unless you're only going to draw naked people, like clothing is a significant part of being an artist or illustrator for figurative art, right? These are basic things you can't do. Now, look, again, so this really upset her. I mean, she wrote back to me and she was, at least momentarily, she was really furious. She, how can you say this? How can you compare my work to a courtroom illustrator? And so, yeah, you're goddamn right. That's the comparison I'm going to make. I'm going to say, look, here is someone who put in the hard work for however many years so that for them, it's effortless. I got some other sketches too. Send her some examples. So look, this is a guy who put in the hard work for so many years. This is a sketch he did in 5 minutes. For him, it's 5 minutes. For you, you couldn't do this in 5 hours. You don't have the level of ability. So are you going to get serious or not? But the most important thing about this story is nobody had ever fucking said this to her. You could live your whole life and nobody is honest with you this way. Nobody works through comparable examples. Nobody points to what you can and can't do. Now, look, again, my brother, who is this failed musician, do you think anyone ever took the time to talk through what he was doing wrong in terms of song composition? Look, listen to the song. Look, I'm going to tell you right now why this song won't get played on the radio. Like, there probably for someone who had the expertise, technically, they could do that. But I'm just saying, I don't really need any special expertise in art to take apart something this way, to ask these challenging questions. I'm going to say also, what I just mentioned to you about video games. I don't feel I really need a lot of technical expertise in video games to talk this through. Okay, the physics are too floaty. The graphics don't look like they're done by a professional illustrator. There are no lighting effects. There's no you just get into, okay, in terms of the user experience, this is not responsive. Like the controls aren't responsive this way with that. Like you could get into, like, just from a consumer perspective, whether or not a game is living up to these standards. All right. If someone writes to me this way, okay, all right, sorry, I'll respond to this. So William says, quote, "There's no nexus between being talented and waking up at 6 a.m. every morning for 5 years." Okay, William, what the fuck do you mean by nexus? What an unbelievably badly written sentence. I mean, what is the point of this claim you just made? Like, are you actually suggesting that talented people don't need to work hard? Is that the claim? Like, really? It's just if that's your claim, why don't you say that? I mean, maybe you're living the dream. We already addressed this like 40 minutes ago or something. Yeah. So Mel just says, quote, "No one believes in the struggle anymore. They want instant greatness." Exactly. And that is itself a product of video games and the video game mentality. People want to press a button. Hilariously, even video games aren't an example of this. Look at the speedrunning champion from Mario 64. If you speedrun video games, you play video games competitively, thousands and thousands of hours of practice, right? Some of them measure how many hours, whether it's speedrunning or any other kind of competitive video game. Nobody gets to say they were just born being a world champion at a video game, whether they wake up at 6 a.m. or they work between midnight and 6 a.m. Like it's true. Like, I mean, William, that's evidently not the point you're making. You could do the work between noon and 6 p.m. every day. That's 6 hours. Okay. It doesn't matter whether you wake up at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and work all through the night, or you wake up at 6 a.m. But no, you're completely wrong, William. You're brainwashed by a culture that wants you to think that these things are innate. How do you think I learned Chinese? Now, look, we can get into. Okay, one of my brothers was diagnosed with a learning disability. He was diagnosed with dyslexia. Okay. I would say another one of my brothers probably had a learning disability that went undiagnosed, just based on talking to him. I really look, diagnosis is very imperfect. I think my father had some kind of serious learning disability. There may be no name for it. And I see the connection between kind of the way his mind worked and didn't work and my brother's. I really wonder if my biological father really was my biological father. Did I just get lucky in terms of the DNA where I didn't inherit any of these traits? Okay, I can look at my brother who was diagnosed with dyslexia, but I can look at my other brothers who weren't diagnosed with anything. But still, like, there's something really wrong with this dude. There's something really wrong with this kid. I can make the claim that if they put in the same number of hours studying Chinese, they would not have gotten the same results I got. That's one kind of claim. And if I put in the same number of hours practicing how to play the guitar, maybe I don't get the same results someone else gets. That's why we talk about talent, right? But that does not mean that I can learn Chinese without waking up at 6 o'clock in the morning and working really hard every day. It does, like, the significance of that inequality in talent, right? It doesn't mean that the effort is disposable. It doesn't mean that you can do it without the struggle. And I'm sorry, it's the same with drawing. It's the same with illustration, with painting, with music, right? The fact that, I mean, two different people, if in theory, we have them under laboratory conditions where we know for a fact they've practiced drawing with the same methods for the same number of hours, differences will come down to things like your vision and your ability with your hand, the actual like musculature of your hand, how good a hand you have and how good your vision is and things. There are some elements of this that can measure. The same way that in basketball, the size of your hand is a predictor for how skilled you can get in basketball, the upper levels of accomplishment. That's been measured for many, many sports, the proportions of different parts of the body. that predispose you to be talented in a given sport or not, right? Okay, but even for those people, like acknowledging that inequality, it does not mean the effort is redundant. No, it just means that with the same level of effort, outcomes will be unequal for different people with different kinds of talent. You know, so again, a learning disability like dyslexia, that's a very clear example. One of my ex-girlfriends, who I was together with for years, she had no diagnosed learning disability. I have no reason to think she had an undiagnosed learning disability. But her vision was very poor, and she wore glasses with so-called, spherical distortion. And I think a lot of what she was struggling with was just that reading was more difficult for her than she wanted to admit to herself. She did that thing where, I think when she was reading, her vision was so poor that she was really filling in a lot of every word. Like she's only really seeing a couple letters of the outline of the word, and her mind is leaping to conclusions and filling in the gap a lot. I think people who are actually diagnosed with certain kinds of blindness, this is a real factor that your imagination is filling in the gaps for what your vision can't do. But I was together with that ex-girlfriend for years, where her vision was so bad that was an element of it. Well, okay, so one direct result of that is she would even you're in a restaurant and she's reading the menu, but she's not really correctly seeing what's on the menu. She's filling in other words. Okay, but indirectly there are knock-on effects for that, for the life of the mind, for what we perceive as talent, what talent she has and what talent she can develop, what she can do with it, right? So this is my point. Yeah, people are unequal. But you're absolutely kidding yourself. So we've already said this is a distinctive aspect of American culture. I want to kill yourself. So look, let's come back to this. This is the example I was working up towards. What do you think it takes to make a successful video game? And nobody gives a fuck about your philosophy, bro. Either you can deliver or you can't. Now, I'm using Rogue Legacy intentionally. Rogue Legacy, in the first one, Rogue Legacy 1, in many ways, a very amateurish game. You can just look at a screenshot of it right now. Look at an image of this game. You can see it's just the art is not that good. The programming is not that good. The physics are not that good. They had some original ideas. People were excited about it. People were encouraging about it. It was a hit. It was a success. Okay. Talk about talent. Talk about ability. Okay. Can you produce a game better than Rogue Legacy? Do you have any idea how many thousands of people are developing software right now and are dumping it onto itch.io, are dumping it onto Steam, are dumping it onto all these distribution platforms, Epic Game Store, whatever? Do you have any idea how many thousands of teams of programmers believe they can create the next Rogue Legacy? They can create the next low-budget, standout hit, and they fail. And they fail again and again and again. And if you look up their accomplishments, what it is they've accomplished, if you're really being honest with yourself, you probably are going to have to admit that you right now don't have the ability even to equal that failure, let alone to exceed the success of Rogue Legacy. And the fucking philosophy, you're saying you want to make a video game that expresses my philosophy in some way. I get it. The same way I talk about writing children's storybooks or being a filmmaker or even doing stand-up comedy. My comedy videos also do deliver my philosophy in a really perverse way, but still it's there. There's even a lot of my perspective on Buddhist philosophy actually comes up in those comedy videos. Partly because they deal with desire and being overwhelmed. Desire as a philosophical theme, I have a certain kind of depth in coming out of those years of working in Buddhist philosophy, and that shows in these satirical comedy performances. I get it. Okay, but guess what? The fact that you have this philosophical agenda or the fact that you have this political agenda, that doesn't mean that you have any talent whatsoever. It doesn't mean you have the ability whatsoever. And it doesn't mean you can actually achieve this kind of success. And let me remind you, this is way harder than judging someone who's going to stand alone on stage and do stand-up comedy. Because then it's just me. I'm all out on my own like Patti LaBelle. It's just one man and a microphone. And it's my writing and my voice, stand-up comedy, it's all on me. Okay? Painting, illustration, right? Similarly solitary. Okay? Music, already we got into this. Can you choose a good song? Can you choose a good song for this audience? Can you choose the right people to work with? You choose the right drummer, you choose the right vocalist, whatever. You choose all the different people in the band. There are all these choices you make, right? Okay. So it's not even just about judging you and your talent or your lack of talent, right? Now you want me to judge what your team, whether or not you're going to be able to put together a team. And this is in the context of a very crowded, very competitive art form where fewer than 1 in a million succeed, right? Really. Go to itch.io. And guys, if you think this stuff is platform dependent, it's not. There's a super successful game called Celeste. Not my kind of game. Celeste with a C. I might as well type out the name. Okay. Do you know how Celeste got started? Today it's on every platform. It's on Nintendo. It's on PlayStation. It's on Steam. It's everywhere. Okay. Celeste started on a platform called Pico 8. There is no console on Earth more doomed than Pico 8. The console was a failure. The programming language is a failure. The platform is a failure. When was the last time someone told you they were staying up all night playing a game on Pico 8? Nobody is playing Pico 8. Okay. Celeste succeeded despite the platform, despite the graphics, I would say too. Look up Celeste Pico 8, the original Celeste. Doesn't have great graphics, doesn't have this, doesn't have that. Okay. So this is this like, okay, right now you can Google it. How many software developers tried to do what Celeste did, even just on that platform? How many thousands tried to succeed by creating an original video game concept on the Pico 8? Okay, so look again, the teenage attitude is, oh, good for you. Oh, you're going to make a video game with a great new idea, with a philosophy, with a political agenda. Oh, great. Oh, good. Oh, yeah, I heard about that game Celeste. I heard about that game Rogue Legacy. Oh, I totally believe it's possible for a small team of people with zero budget to have this level of success. Yeah, it's 1 in fucking 10 million. Okay, from my perspective, okay, from a middle-aged perspective, oh, if I want to develop my ideas into a video game, if I want to develop my ideas into a film, if I want to develop my ideas into anything, I will work with people who already have the proven track record. If someone sends me an email saying, hey, I was the lead coder on Rogue Legacy, hey, I was the lead software developer who made Celeste, I know how to make a video game with these kinds of graphics and these kinds of physics, this kind of gameplay that knocks it out of the park, because I already have a proven track record of this kind of success. And now I want to make a video game that communicates this philosophical point, that has this allegorical value, has this emotional value. Okay, now I'm interested. Now I'm listening, motherfucker. So look, I get it, guys. And okay, I'll come back. Thanks for your comments, Sam. I mean, I appreciate your contribution to the conversation. On the one hand, you have this encouraging attitude toward teenagers and amongst teenagers, maybe one teenager or another. I heard Mike Myers saying this, the comedian Mike Myers. He said that what he loves about American culture is that everyone has the attitude, who do you want to be? What do you want to do? Oh, you can accomplish it. Now, that reflects his experience with American culture, that Americans have this very can-do, positive, encouraging attitude, whereas the English judge you in terms of who you already are, what you're already able to do, what you've already accomplished. So that's his experience in life. Mike Myers, he lived a life back and forth between England and Canada. And then after he started being successful, he migrated from Canada to the United States. He probably has a very warped view of all three cultures for that reason. But yeah, as a successful millionaire in the United States, his impression of American culture is that everyone has this very positive, encouraging attitude. What I would here call a teenage attitude. Oh, you want to make the next hit video game? You want to make the next hit movie? Good for you. And there's just this kind of encouragement and positivity. Okay, what you're asking me is to judge whether or not you're talented. And again, I've had several emails just in the last 2 weeks, but obviously over the last 8 years, I've had many more. But I've had some emails, and occasionally people made YouTube videos where they were really asking me, they were really pleading with me to recognize that they were talented. All right? You want me to judge whether or not you are talented, right? Now, guys, sorry, even in my life, I gave this example of the high school teacher. Okay. I have had university professors who thought I was a genius. I have had university professors who said to me directly that they thought I was a genius, and a genius of a kind that there are only a few of in each generation. I've had professors really sit me down and say to me that they thought I was extraordinarily talented and extraordinarily intelligent. I have had that. But I've also had professors, I've also had teachers and instructors tell me that they think I'm a moron, tell me that they think I'm an idiot, tell me that I have no talent at all. And in both cases, you can engage in a kind of interesting analysis of their perception and misperception of who you are, right? And you can engage in an analysis of what it is they want to see, like what it is they're yearning for, what it is they want to discover. There's that old saying, a man who has a hammer sees everything as a nail. Well, there's a more perverse and bizarre form of misperception that comes from a professor who is looking for a certain kind of talent. And therefore they see it in you because that's the talent they're looking for. And it's probably not the talent you've got. I remember one professor telling me that he was saying this in a very flattering way. This is based on reading my writing at the time. He felt that I was fundamentally a romantic figure, a romantic intellectual, very closely comparable to Friedrich Nietzsche. I really felt that I was a Nietzsche. This is hilarious to me. I've made videos talking about how much I despise Nietzsche and his philosophy. But this is way back there. Already at that time, I found that laugh out loud hilarious. And you could just tell this professor, I mean, he thinks I'm brilliant. He thinks I'm talented. It's great. That's nice. Thank you. But he's projecting onto me the type of talent he's looking for. In a sense, I think what he's doing is he's imagining the type of student he yearns to work with, right? Like if you were a music teacher, you can imagine a language teacher or something. Like, oh, I wish I had more of this type of student. I wish this was the kind of student I could work with. And then that's probably what there's a certain fixed notion in his mind. Now I'm the anti-Nietzsche. What can I tell you? I'm the opposite of Nietzsche in every conceivable way. I have nothing in common with Nietzsche. I knew that he meant it in a flattering way. Now, in terms of romanticism, because I remember he talked about that, like what he meant by romanticism. I don't think I fit into that mold either. Perhaps I'm anti-romantic. I'm an anti-romanticist, intellectual author, so on and so forth. Anyway, the point is this: I know what it's like to have someone tell me that that I'm extraordinarily talented, and I also know what it's like to have someone tell me that I have no talent at all, or that I'm incredibly stupid, or both. And that high school teacher, the science teacher, she was a good example of that. How people judge you based on notions they have in their own mind, including just of how old you are and what you ought to know, so on and so forth. And, how often do you interact with someone who's actually judging your talent in terms of the potential for what you could do? It's rare. It's not never. How often do people evaluate you in terms of what you could do, as opposed to right now, what you can do, the ability you already have, or even more commonly, the accomplishments you've already got? Now, look, guys, I've been in the position of making a really tough pitch to people. I've been in the position of saying to someone, look, these are my accomplishments. This is what I've already done. I went to Cambodia. I went to Laos. I did all this research. I published peer-reviewed writing. I delivered a lecture at Cambridge University, England. Here's the lecture. Oh, sorry, actually Oxford. Sorry, I mixed it up because I took the bus into. I was living in Cambridge. I took the bus to Oxford and delivered the lecture at Oxford. Anyway, also at London, University of London. Okay, I have competed and performed at this really high level as a scholar of Buddhism. And now I want to take on the study of Korean and Ojibwe, First Nations languages. I want to take this talent that is proven that is demonstrated. I can do this research, I can learn these languages, and then I can write essays and lectures that hit it out of the park. I can write books, right? Dealing with politics, philosophy, history, and languages that are really hard to learn, right? I've proven this. And now I want you to recognize my potential, my talent, to take that proven demonstrated ability and plug it into, pour my energy and effort and ambition into a new field of studies. New for me, right? And for me, that was Korean Ojibwe, First Nations politics, First Nations history at First Nations University in Saskatchewan. Actually, if you guys don't already know, I actually went there and did that. Okay? So, like today, right now, what kind of fucking response do you think I get when I go up to University of Victoria, Department of Classics, Department of Latin and Greek, and I say, hey, here's my proven track record. This is what I did with Chinese, because now this is years later. At the time I gave that story, I hadn't done Chinese yet. This is what I did with Chinese. Yeah, I learned Chinese in 7 months. How about you, fucko? I've got the papers to prove it. Okay. This is what I did with Chinese. This is what I did with Cree. This is what I did with Ojibwe. This is what I did with Pali. This is what I did with Laotian, with Cambodian, with Japanese. Oh, it's a long list. Oh, here are my publications. Here are the books I've written. Here are the articles I've written. Yeah, here are the comedy videos I've made on YouTube. Wow, look at how talented I am in so many different fucking fields. Also, look at the work ethic. Look how hardworking I am with nobody standing on my shoulder. Are you going to recognize my talent for what I can do if I now pour my energy into this field, if I now switch into Latin? What do you think the response is from these no talent fucks? How do you think they feel? How do you think, well, we're not really looking for applicants. We're looking for supplicants. We're not really interested in evaluating how much talent you've got. We're not even interested in looking at your accomplishments. They will not even look at peer-reviewed papers. I have lots of experience with that. University professors who say, oh, well, we can't consider your application if you don't have peer-reviewed papers. And now I've got them, and they won't look at them. They won't. Trust me, I have tons of experience. Well, we're not really interested in evaluating how much talent you have, and we're not really interested in evaluating how much ability you have. And by the way, I've done this with Chinese. Holy shit, is that depressing? Trying to get a degree in Chinese politics. No, we're not interested, because we're not looking for applicants. We're not looking for people with a lot of ambition. We're not looking for people who are hardworking, have talent or anything else. What we really like around here is not applicants, it's supplicants. What we like are teenage girls who just graduated from high school and have no clear sense of direction or purpose, are kind of reaching around for the meaning of life and don't know what to do with themselves, and they're shy and they have low self-esteem. And then the professors get to feel like they have really high self-esteem and high confidence. They get to feel that they are in control and that they're not going to be asked any questions they can't answer and that nobody's going to challenge their authority. Like, dude, the attitudes within a university, my point is there's no interest. There's no interest in evaluating how much talent you have. It's very hard to even get them to evaluate your actual accomplishments or your current ability. Well, guess what? Learning Latin is unbelievably easy compared to the other languages I've worked on in the past. And it's, if you're willing to look at my accomplishments, like, oh, this is how much Chinese this guy can learn in 7 months, huh? Gee, after 7 months of studying Chinese, he actually published a couple of newspaper articles, like written in Chinese. Oh, and he wrote this children's storybook himself in Chinese. That storybook was written in Chinese and then translated into English, by the way. Oh, gee, this guy, okay, wow. This is someone with some combination of talent and work ethic that has been proven again and again and again in very hard circumstances with no help and no encouragement from anyone. This is a guy who slept under a mosquito net and chopped his own firewood first thing in the morning in northern Laos while doing humanitarian work. He learned Laotian and Pali without even access to a fucking computer, with barely any access to electricity. Gee, this is someone who, in conditions much tougher than Cambridge University or Oxford, really managed to get out and do something. And he's talented and brilliant in terms of comedy and making monologues about philosophy. It's difficult to exaggerate the cruelty of middle-aged people this way. And sorry, I should say, even and especially those middle-aged people where it's part of their fucking job description that they're supposed to encourage you. It's part of their job description that they're supposed to cultivate and reward new talent. They won't do it. And one of the reason I'm getting at this moment, is their own insecurity, is that your talent, your ability, your ambition makes them feel bad about themselves. Okay. When I got back to the University of Victoria after living in Kunming, so the situation was like, oh, you guys can't teach Chinese. Well, I bought an airplane ticket to China, and in 7 months I learned Chinese, and then I came back. Do you think any of them were happy to see me? Do you think any of them were happy for me? Do you think one fucking professor said to me, oh, I'm so happy for you that you found a way to learn Chinese on your own because our university department is garbage? No, not one. Okay. They're not happy for me, and it doesn't make them feel good about themselves. We could repeat this with art and music and politics and all kinds of other things. Human nature, tragically, is fundamentally competitive rather than cooperative. It's pathetic, but this is what plays out again and again and again. Okay, so it's in this context that people are writing to me for encouragement. They're writing to me asking if they're talented, and I have to tell them again and again, no, you're not talented, and you haven't even done enough work. You haven't produced enough yet for me to even judge whether or not you're talented. You're many years away of many, many hours of hard work before I can even judge that. And when you're talking about a complex art form involving many people working together, like video games, where the relationship between the creator and the audience is so strained. So Sam raises this. Sam says curation by streamers and influencers more broadly is a big part of what makes or breaks creative products today. And he says further, quote, you could succeed fabulously with making the product and then fail spectacularly in marketing the product. So, in cinema, very often the budget for marketing exceeds the budget for filming. Like the creation of the film costs $15 million, $20 million, and then more than $20 million is spent on marketing. Not always, but there were many examples of that. So that problem with connecting to an audience, and that's what you're trying to do through marketing. Now, Sam, the specific issue of curation by streamers. Okay, Sam. So I wrote a book. I wrote 2 books. You happen to know it's a tremendously meaningful, tremendously emotionally moving book. I know you've read it. Okay. How many YouTubers have reviewed or discussed or commented on my book? How many live streamers? Now, we could live in a world where there was a vegan talk show where a group of vegans sat around a table and they'd all read my book and they did a discussion of my book. All right. That didn't happen. I can name one YouTube channel that reviewed my book, and it's you, Sam. You reviewed my book. But there aren't 5 other YouTube channels. There aren't 10 other YouTube channels. I don't think there's even one other YouTube channel that read and reviewed my book. Now, I mentioned a vegan talk show being a place where people would sit around and discuss it. Let's get even more utopian. What about a politics talk show? What about a show that's not vegan in any way? It's people sitting around talking about politics, where they the book of that week was my book, No More Manifestos, for whatever reason. And you have a group, whether it's 4 people or 6 people sitting around discussing the book. Okay, that is, curation by streamers, curation by influencers, right? Okay, my point is this. If you think it's hard for your video game to be the video game that's being talked about in this way, talked about on YouTube, talked about on Twitch, talked about on live stream, if you think it's hard to be the video game people are talking about, what if you paint? Do you have any fucking idea how hard it is to make the next painting that people are talking about on YouTube, that people are talking about on live streams, to make the next painting, to make the next book. Like, the absurdity is video games are probably the single easiest medium to get ahead in that way, right? It's pretty easy to cross the threshold where a couple of people are doing, what you did for my book, are making a YouTube video talking about it or filming themselves playing the game. That's not that high a threshold. I would make the further claim that even the vast majority of games, video games that cross that threshold, the vast majority of them still fail. You can have Twitch streams and YouTube videos talking about your game, and it's still a failure. It doesn't make any money. It doesn't reach an audience of any significance. So, question from Mel. Welcome to the audience, Mel. Maybe you changed your name. I don't remember having someone in the audience named Mel before. Mel asks, quote, do you believe someone can lose their talent or burn out? The vast majority of talented people get pregnant and have kids. And that's the end. Some people become drug addicts. Some people become alcoholics. But what do you mean by losing your talent? I haven't studied Chinese for years. Does it mean I've lost my talent for the Chinese language or Chinese history or Chinese politics or something? But I think you guys can imagine whether a man or a woman, if someone starts raising a child, they stop studying Chinese, they stop making progress as an artist, whether that's painting, music, video games, or any other example. So yeah, I'm really just answering this by challenging the concept of losing your talent. I think in most cases, people just do other things. And certainly drug addiction alone is at, epidemic levels. You tell me what's more popular, having children or drug addiction. They're both a huge percentage of human beings cease to be talented and cease to be ambitious for just one of those two reasons. Yeah. So Cheesy Puffs, whoever Cheesy Puffs is in the audience, you are getting at what my real ultimate interest is here. It's just not the topic of today's video. Cheesy Puffs asks, can you write something? Can you write a book? Can you write comedy? Can you write stand-up comedy that will tear down the Communist Party of China, that will tear down the regime that currently rules China? I will quote him directly. Cheesy Puff says, quote, the empire of lies needs all the talent they can get. Okay. Who can do what Voltaire once did before? Now I've got to tell you, in my own time, I really feel like Chris Rock, when he first came on to Saturday Night Live, when Chris Rock first became really famous and successful as a comedian, I think he was doing something politically significant. And then it went nowhere. Chris Rock had no interest in going further politically or doing anything of significance. Chris Rock went on to just make a bunch of jokes about cheating on his wife. As far, if you find it funny, you find it funny. But there was a political significance to sort of the first big step in Chris Rock's career. If Chris Rock were here, he would object. He'd say, don't you know how many films I did before I was on Saturday Night Live? He was in New Jack City. Anyway, regardless, Chris Rock, I think from his perspective, he had a long career leading up to that. My point being, there was a sense in which the comedy of Chris Rock at a certain moment was challenging to mainstream American culture, in which it mattered politically. I think some people would argue that about maybe just one song by Public Enemy. There was maybe got one hit song that had some political significance, but then again, that went nowhere. There was no, their career as a whole has been insignificant politically. Shout out to I'm Gonna Get You, Sucker. Yeah. My point is here to just say it's not just Voltaire. And if you've actually read Voltaire, it's garbage. Voltaire is a terrible writer. He's a terrible writer, just considered as a creative writer, just considered as entertainment. And it's terrible considered as comedy. It's really, really bad, his writing. And it's also of no substance philosophically or politically. There's nothing to admire in the work of Voltaire. But Voltaire's work had tremendous epoch-making political significance. Can you do that through filmmaking? Look at Michael Moore. Sorry, Michael Moore as a filmmaker. Again, it's similar to what I just said about Voltaire. Voltaire's actual writing is terrible. The actual books are terrible, but they had this tremendous impact, tremendous significance. Michael Moore is a terrible filmmaker. He's an idiot. He's an imbecile. Like, considered as films, as filmmaking, considered as entertainment or otherwise, they're terrible. Okay, but Michael Moore's films obviously have had political and historical significance, probably more than Chris Rock or I'm Gonna Get You, Sucker, the black comedies of that time. Okay, so we can run at that. Who can outdo Michael Moore? Who can outdo Chris Rock? Who can outdo Voltaire? And who can challenge the status quo, not just in the United States of America, but in communist China, in Myanmar, or in Iran? That for me really is the ultimate challenge and why the arts are worth talking about. I don't know. Does anyone become an artist just to sustain the current status quo? Does anyone become an artist because they don't want the world to change? There are a lot of things I hate about comedy, but I think, what I love about comedy is that so much of it comes from this sense of the world is crazy. This makes no sense. It has to change, but it's not going to change. And that's why I'm on stage making this joke about it right now. This is so awful. This is so intolerable. It's got to change. It should change. It must change, but nothing is going to change. That's a real element of comedy, especially stand-up comedy, in the American tradition. Right. So Sam, obviously, I could now give a 2-hour lecture in response to this comment you make. Sam says, quote, "I wonder if we can even say that Voltaire did that and not the people who fought in the revolution, not the people who actually burned things down, so on and so forth." And, this question of, look, how about Walt Disney? Walt Disney changed the world too. No, I mean, ultimately, I don't think it's Voltaire who changed the world. Ultimately, these things come down to coercion. Ultimately, the power of the Catholic Church in France had to be broken by brute force. And that brute force came in several successive waves. But the violence of the French Revolution, no, that really was the end of the power of the church in France. And it couldn't have ended any other way. Put it this way, it couldn't have ended with any less violence. And as you know, I mean, I'm a nihilistic atheist. I don't think the power of the church is over yet, but it was very dramatically diminished. And it wasn't diminished by the writing of Voltaire. It was diminished through violence and coercion. Okay, so wrapping up this video, this has obviously been much longer than I had imagined it would be, because I think the message of this video is very simple. When you have a cure for an illness, you don't need marketing. Let's say you have a cure for ringworm. If you guys don't know what ringworm is, it's a skin condition. It's something like 10% of people have it at any one time. I'm sorry, you can Google it, but a significant percentage of people at any one time have ringworm. They may not even know they have it. It's a skin ailment. If you have a cream, you've invented a new medicated topical ointment, a cream, and you simply have the fact 80% of cases of ringworm disappear within 5 days if you apply this cream to ringworm, to this condition on your skin. You don't need marketing. That's when the bullshit stops. Nobody needs to sell this to you. Nobody needs to convince you that they're talented or visionary or have a great idea. Oh, you have something that works. It works. You can prove that it works with kind of one number in that sense. It's falsifiable, it's verifiable, it works, it's over. You don't have to tell me a story. Now, what happens if you have a cream for ringworm that doesn't really work? What do we get into then? So you have a cream for ringworm, and it's got a combination of herbs, and it smells nice. Okay. Oh, let me tell you a complex story about this, about this treatment. There's this brilliant young man called Eisel Mazard, and he was studying Buddhist philosophy in Cambodia while doing humanitarian work. And he was up in the mountains trying to find this, remote Buddhist sanctuary, this temple in the middle of the jungle. And he was riding his bicycle through the mountains, and there were monkeys attacking him. And he fell off his bicycle, and he broke his leg, and he couldn't find this Buddhist monastery. And then these monks came out of the jungle, and they rescued him, and they carried him to the monastery. And when he was at the monastery, they used this ointment. It had this amazing smell. It smelled like something he'd never smelled before. Here they were in this remote Buddhist monastery in the jungle, and there's this wow, he made this discovery. The people in this village had been crushing herbs together in a mortar and pestle. These herbs they gathered from the Cambodian jungle, and it has this wonderful smell and this wonderful invigorating effect. And now I want you to buy this ointment that we're mass producing in a factory in Kenosha or something, and with this story, right? I want you to buy this ointment for when you have ringworm. And I'm going to just vaguely claim that it helps with the itching or something, right? Going to make vague claims that I can't be taken. It makes you feel better in the vague sense. We don't have facts, right? Okay, guys, yeah. You see what I'm getting at here? Like, you've got to shift from a view of the world that's based on these kinds of narratives, because that's what you grow up with. It's what you grow up in marketing and advertising, in movies as a finished product that you view as a member of the audience. It's what you grow up with in terms of people being encouraging about talent. They'll tell you stories about geniuses who accomplish great things, but you're just getting that story. You're not learning about the hard work. You have to switch from that view of the world to a results-based view. Now, I mentioned this very briefly more than an hour ago. So Mel says the FDA would never approve it if it works. Okay. What if let's say a good-looking teenage girl who says she wants to be a therapist? Okay. Let's say specifically, everyone encourages her. Everyone says, good for you. That's wonderful. You're going to be a great therapist. And let's say she goes into addiction counseling, because that's where the money's at. That's where there are so many customers. She ends up studying that, specializing in that. And I've mentioned that she's good looking and female for a reason. These are female dominated fields. Her parents are encouraging, her teachers are encouraging. Nobody ever scrutinizes whether or not she's talented. At what point does someone sit down with her and say, okay, this therapy you're doing, does it work? Yeah. You went to school, you got this diploma, you've had so many patients that you've counseled over so many years. Okay, when I look at your track record, I'm looking for results. I want to see if what you're doing works. A lot of people have these kinds of stories. The story might not be as dramatic as going to the jungle, but it's like, oh, well, when I was a girl, there was this terrible accident and my father had PTSD. And then I saw my father recover from his PTSD when he went to therapy. And that's when I decided I was going to become a therapist, whatever. They have some kind of story that lets them convince themselves that they're talented, that they're guided. How often does somebody like that get sat down someone sit down with them and confront them with the fact that, look, your counseling, your therapy doesn't get results, and his does. Okay. You can even ask this person, why do you think you're a good therapist? Oh, I'm really caring. I'm really compassionate. I'm really considerate. No, you're not. I have videotape evidence. We had a security camera in the corner recording all of your interactions with these people, all of your counseling sessions. We went through and evaluated it. We got the evaluation from your customers, and then we went through the film. We picked it out. We're going to compare. Here's the footage of you doing therapy. Here's the footage of our most successful counselor. Here, I'm going to show you how compassionate he is. His numbers are way better than you. He gets the outcomes, right? He gets the results. Okay, look, okay, now watch this film clip. See how compassionate he is? See how caring he is? Now watch this film clip. See, you think you're compassionate, but you're not. Watch the film. You're actually cold and judgmental and impatient towards this person. Right? I used the example before of an artist where I confronted her, and she is a beautiful woman, by the way. Whether or not that's part of the problem, I can't say. Maybe all her life, because she's a beautiful woman, people were just encouraging her. Nobody had ever said to her before, you can't draw cloth. You can't draw clothing. Look at the fucking clothes in this portrait, in this picture. You're drawing like an 8-year-old. This is not even a teenage way of drawing a shirt or drawing the folds in cloth. You don't have the texture. Nobody had ever said anything like that to her. Not even the professors and tutors, people she was paying, where their job was to provide exactly that kind of advice. All right. In the creative arts, there's a total dearth of this. There's a total absence. And, in talking about something like therapy or counseling, in some ways, this is more like the creative arts than it is like a science. This is a kind of theater, kind of religious ritual in some ways too. All right. I guarantee you, the vast majority of therapists, the vast majority of counselors have never been evaluated this way, and they never will be. No one will ever sit down and compare them to someone else's work. And, with drug rehab, you have a measurable outcome. Like, did this person recover? Did this person become sober or not? Like, what were the measured outcomes? You can interview that patient, say, look, did this help you or not? Like, there's a destination point that's very clear. With something like marriage counseling, it's more difficult to evaluate. Is the point of marriage counseling to keep this couple together? They don't get divorced. Maybe the point of marriage counseling is that they do get divorced. You help them through their divorce. Like, look, you know what? The right decision for you guys is to get divorced. Like, it's not as easy always to pin a positive, measurable outcome. All right. People live their whole lives with the delusion that they have a talent they don't have. And it very often is things like this. It very often is, I have a sense of color. I have a sense of form, like as an artist. I'm very compassionate. Or I have a sense of purpose. I have a sense of mission and meaning and mandate. I have a philosophy that I want to be in this work of art, that I want to be in this video game. Okay? And that's not talent. All right? If you have a cure for ringworm, the only question that matters is, does it work? And as soon as you know it works, as soon as it's falsifiable and verifiable, then it works, right? Nothing else matters. Okay. And it may be hard in this moment for you to construe that whether we are talking about video games or illustration or stand-up comedy, right? Or any of the other creative arts, right? There's this hard, measurable, palpable sense of, does it work? Does it get results? And the question of whether or not you're talented, by contrast, right? It's going to go unasked and, for the most part, unanswered.